there, I would appreciate it. All right, we left off Thursday. God, it seems like so long ago. But we left off on Thursday talking about Truman's domestic programs. We spent a lot of time talking about his kind of foreign policy as far as the Cold War goes, and we'll touch base a little bit on his domestic programs here. Now, Truman largely initiates in 1949 what he calls the Fair Deal. You know, and of course, to piggyback off of previous deals, we go to Teddy Roosevelt. He had the Square Deal, right? FDR had the New Deal, and Truman has the Fair Deal. Okay, so they each have kind of their own deal, but it's basically an economic program for how to make things better domestically. Now, his domestic program largely goes with a lot of conservative backlash. Now, we have during his term, his remainder of term from what we see a more conservative Congress during his term in office. And as a result of that, many of the programs that he tried pushing for during his own term don't actually go through, okay? But he argues that this needed to be an extension of the New Deal because without it, we would see ourselves fall back into a recession and ultimately fall into a deep depression. Now, it's not entirely like, you know, off base, because in 46, 47, the United States does enter into a slight recession. But he hopes to try to prevent that deep depression that occurred after World War I by putting some things in place that would help that out. And he argues with the Fair Deal, he says that, you know, we don't need to necessarily give handouts or anything to help and give money to people, but we should definitely help Americans to achieve more. If we're going to help our veterans to achieve more, why not help the rest of our society? It's not like they didn't also help out during the course of the war. Even if they weren't fighting overseas, they made sure that the United States was prosperous enough that we could be successful overseas, right, by going into the factories and working and whatnot. So he argues that we need to expand Social Security benefits. Now, Social Security does see an expansion in benefits. It goes out so that farmers can now qualify for Social Security, as well as the domestic worker can also qualify for Social Security, and they have both been prevented from that previously. He argues for an increase in the minimum wage, which does go through, okay? But some of the other stuff we don't see go through when we get through this. He argues that there needs to be full employment, that everybody in the United States should be gainfully employed. What does that sound like? That everybody should have a job. It's communism, it's socialism, right? Yeah, it's socialism. So in a conservative Congress and in a time in the United States where we're having these, well, communism, anti-communism, democracy, right? Here we have a very socialist idea that there should be full employment, that everybody that can work should be working. So you can see why Congress is like, we're not going to go that far. We're not going to go so far as to put in a national health care system. Okay? We are not going to go so far as to ensure and abolish poll taxes. We're not quite sure if we want to get rid of some of these domestic policies. But we'll see some other things created. We do see some initiatives within public housings. So getting rid of the tenements of the cities and getting rid of that style of housing, and instead building new slum housing, basically the projects. But these were supposed to be designed for the American working poor to give them a nicer place to live that would have more modern amenities. In addition to that, he goes about electrifying the United States. Let's make sure that all areas of the United States, rural and otherwise, have access to electricity. And we should also go about looking at some long-range environmental policies. Now, there's not a whole lot long-range environmental policies that he is able to take on and accomplish. In fact, there's quite a bit of pushback from that because go industry, build, 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 right? It's not until we see Rachel Carlson write The Silent Spring, which you will be reading a portion of here this week, that we actually start to see people begin to argue for environmental reform in the United States. So that is post-Truman's presidency. Now, as a direct result of his fair deal, though, and the pushback that occurs in his fair deal, which he begins pushing out some of these ideas even prior to him actually running for office on his own. When Truman campaigns in the 1948 election, the political parties wind up getting split. And we see, once again, the Progressive Party come back to fruition. We see the Dixiecrats, which were the Southern Democratic Party, okay, and of course the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But as a result of what becomes almost split of the Democratic Party, the Dixiecrats, and the Progressive Party, we see conflict arise, and as a result, there begins to be this idea that there's no way that Truman will actually be victorious in the election. But Truman, in order to campaign, runs around on trains, giving all these speeches, talking about what he will do for America, and largely is able to sell his fair deal to the American public. And despite what most polls said, the American public votes Truman in. So go Truman. He becomes elected. Which is why you see fun little images like this of Truman holding up a newspaper. Newspapers were so sure that Dewey would win the election that they actually pre-printed their newspapers. It makes sense if you think about it this way. A newspaper is a business, right? They're there to make money, and if you're the one to get that headline to the newsstand first, you're going to sell more papers than the other guy. Well, unfortunately for the Chicago Daily Tribune, it meant that they printed the wrong headline. Fortunately for us, in history, it's kind of cool, right? I mean, we have this wrong headline that exists there. But he gets a lot of support from laborers, from African Americans, and farmers, and as a result is able to win that narrow victory. Now, much like after World War I, we entered into a time of isolation, and to a certain, or to a large extent, a time frame of conformity, of really kind of pushing back from the outside world. And as a direct result of that isolationism and nationalism, the United States entered into a Red Scare. Now, post-World War II, then, we enter into a Red Scare again. First Red Scare, it's post-World War I, and largely pushed on by Palmer and the Palmer raids, which leads to the creation of the FBI. Okay? World War II, second Red Scare, largely pushed on by Joseph McCarthy, and leads to the creation of HUAC, and leads to the growth of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, and leads to the growth of the CIA. Okay, now, the CIA is predominantly used more for international, look at other countries. FBI, look at our own people and what our own people are doing. So much so that the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, literally had files on everybody. Everybody. Like literally. Like anybody and everybody who was anyone at all. Whether you would be in politics or as a celebrity, he had a file on you. Okay? And he used those files in order to be able to basically get himself out of several sticky situations and also basically almost make himself like a dictator of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover remains in power in the FBI from the time of the creation of the FBI until he dies. Okay? Because all the presidents who tried to get rid of him, he'd pull out his file and be like, well, you can get rid of me, but are you sure you want to do that, Robert Kennedy? I have this big file on you. Which is probably one of his biggest opponents was Robert Kennedy. But he's never able to get him out of there. Robert Kennedy acting as Attorney General and him butted heads a lot. Okay? But anyways, back to this. During the second time frame, it largely even starts even before the war is over. You have to realize that, you know, Russia falls to communism in 1917, right, or the Bolshevik Revolution. But communism begins spreading there even prior to the war. The United States even enters into the war. Okay, communism is spreading in the world, and the United States wants to try to control that. There's also that fear that that change could cause unrest within our government. And you have to remember that during the Great Depression, there was civil unrest because of a lack of jobs. There was hunger marches. There were demonstrations. Al Capone is one of the first dudes to open up a soup kitchen. And he does so as a way to clean up his public image in Chicago. But there's a lot of unrest that existed in the United States. But it's 1940, and although the United States is not yet in war, we're on the eve of entering into war. And that is something that is kind of a scary thing for the U.S. So we go back to court precedent and a legal precedent that says that in times of war, it is okay for the federal government to do what? Curtail your rights, right? To limit your civil liberties. What gives the federal government the right to do that? Yeah, well, what's the precedent? What's the court case or the acts, the legal precedent? The Alien and Sedition Acts, okay? And you're right, the Espionage and Sedition Act is where we get the final precedent because the Alien and Sedition Acts are overturned. The Espionage and Sedition Acts are upheld by what Supreme Court case ruling? Schenck v. U.S., exactly. And it says that, hey, you can't, much like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, you can't speak out against the government because it would represent a clear and present danger to everyone, okay? So we go back to that in the creation of the Smith Act, which allows for the government to prosecute anyone who is looking to overthrow the government. Now, we're not even actually in war yet. And yet here the United States is curtailing your freedoms. We go on further in the 50s to pass the McCarran International Security Act. And in this particular act, we're basically saying, look, if we think that you might be a communist, you cannot travel internationally. Because you might run away to Russia and sell secrets and sell Soviet information, right? So you can't travel internationally if we suspect you as a communist. Now, both of these things are upheld by the Supreme Court, are ruled constitutional. And it is under McCarran that we see the creation of HUAC. Now, HUAC was the House Un-American Activities Committee, and basically what they did, their whole job as a division within the House of Representatives, as a special group in the House of Representatives, is to go around and try to find people that were participating in un-American activities, which can be a whole host of things that could be deemed un-American. And a whole host of things were deemed un-American. Probably the most famous cases that are tried by HUAC are Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs, okay, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. It is because of HUAC also that we'll see the rise of McCarthy, and as a result of that, then we see those FBI agents being pushed in to infiltrate suspected communist groups within the United States. Now, that existed in several places that you may not actually think of it existing. One of those places is in Hollywood. Now, think of it this way. If you are a movie producer or an actor or whatever else, do you have a slight influence over what the American public does or says or thinks? Yeah, maybe. What about today? Do you have an influence over what the American public says or thinks or does? Yeah, they help to shape our culture. And so HUAC decided that Hollywood and certain people within Hollywood were so powerful that they basically had to take a loyalty oath, that they would ensure that they were not a member of the Communist Party. And they were investigated. Probably the worst off was a group by the name of the Hollywood 10, or collectively they were called the Hollywood 10. But some of these were some of the biggest in the movie industry. And they were actually arrested and put on trial and sent to jail for violations under the McCarran Act. In addition, there were about 250 people in Hollywood that were blacklisted prevented from doing anything. No making of movies, no acting in a movie, no directing a movie, no producing a movie during this time frame, because they were participating in un-American activities. Now, interestingly enough, one of those individuals actually testifies on the behalf of many of those other fellow actors, as he at that point in time was an actor and a member of the Screen Actors Guild, Mr. Ronald Reagan. Now, eventually Ronald Reagan will go on to become president of said United States, but he starts out as an actor there. Alger Hiss, as I told you, is one of the more famous individuals that's brought up under HUAC. But Alger Hiss actually gets accused by Whittaker Chambers. And Chambers is an editor of Time magazine, and he was a member of the Communist Party. And he basically argues that Hiss was also a member of the Communist Party, and not only that, but he had secret papers that he calls the Pumpkin Papers, because reportedly Hiss was giving this information out to other people by actually putting it in, hiding it inside pumpkins, and then giving out pumpkins to people. Excuse me. So, but Hiss is a diplomat, and he's a very prominent diplomat. And so, what we see ensue is court cases going back and forth between the two of them. Hiss will sue Chambers for being libel, basically defamation of character. Chambers will testify before the House committee that Hiss had given him these secret documents. Hiss denies ever being a spy, ever being a member of the Communist Party. In fact, he goes so far as to deny that he had ever even met Chambers, HUAC, and a committee member, the dude from California by the name of Richard Nixon, okay, who's currently a senator from the state of California. He continues to investigate and will actually interrogate Hiss, asking him about what's going on and everything else like that. In the end, they're never able to find any information to effectively convict Hiss, if I remember correctly. I'm going to double check that, but I'm not seeing it in my notes here. But the reality of that is it does lead him to basically lose his position as a senior diplomat in the United States. And as a direct result, will bring Richard Nixon into prominence on the national stage. In fact, so much so that within 5 years, he becomes Vice President of the United States of America. And then obviously will go on to become President of the United States of America, and the only president who quit. Okay. I mean, he was going to get fired, so which is worse? Or better, I guess. Which is, get fired or quit? I don't know. Probably quit. That's what he decided to do. So, but it does bring Nixon to that national promise or stage. The other American group that is largely met with a great deal of suspicion is Julius and Ethel Rosenbergs. The Rosenbergs were arrested by the FBI for spying and quote-unquote selling secrets to the Soviets, including information about the atomic weapons. Now, Julius and Ethel made no bones about the fact that, yes, they were members of the Communist Party. In fact, they were actually pretty prominent members of the Communist Party, but they denied having ever sold any information to the Soviets. And in reality, even to this day, we have no definitive proof that the Rosenbergs actually gave any information to the Soviets. The only thing that we know is that, yes, they were members of the Communist Party. But being members of the Communist Party, it was definitely an un-American activity. And being very outspoken members of the Communist Party, it was an un-American activity. The Rosenbergs are actually tried and found guilty of the crime of treason, and as a result of that, are executed for their crime. Okay? So, yeah. But again, right, it brings to fruition kind of these ideas that are nativist sentiment, but also this great fear of what communism potentially represented to the United States and to what could be the downfall of our entire system. Now, in addition to that, and we see that there begins to be a rise of what becomes known as McCarthyism. This is largely spurred on by a Republican governor from the state of Wisconsin. Oh, senator, I'm sorry, not not governor, senator at the time, Joseph McCarthy. And basically, Joseph McCarthy, on February 5th of 1950, he asserts that he has a list of about 205 people working in the State Department that are members of the Communist Party, and that they were a direct threat to the safety and security of the United States. He argued and was able to convince the public that he was looking out for national security and in the best interests of the United States as a whole. Because of the fear that existed in the United States over the possibility of a communist overthrow, he's able to gain a lot of national attention. So much so that we wind up actually having hearings, the McCarthy hearings, to prove or disprove if you were communist or not. He attacks many prominent members in society and in government, and not only attacks those individuals, but also attacks Truman. He attacks Eisenhower, saying that they are both soft on communism, and maybe they're being soft on communism because they secretly want to be communist or make the American country a communist state. Okay? McCarthy is largely able to get a lot of support from the Republican Party and blue-collar workers throughout the United States, but he's never able to actually produce the list of 205 people. But what he does use is he used fear and intimidation tactics to sit there and to question you and question you and question you and question you and question you until you finally decided that, you know what, if I just get him off of my back, maybe he'll leave me alone, he'll find me innocent, whatever else, I'm going to accuse you of being a communist. And it spreads like that. Now, if you're thinking about this, this has happened before in our history. It was called the
Crucible.
Well, the Crucible is based off of McCarthy, but it was the Salem witch trials, okay? Yeah. You're on the right track, but just ahead. Basically, nobody was really safe from his accusations. Like I said, he accused Truman, he accused Eisenhower, he accused the Secretary of State, Acheson, he accused George C. Marshall of it as well. Marshall at the time was Justice, not Chief Justice, but Justice of the in the Supreme Court. And he argued additionally that members of the Democratic Party were guilty of over 20 years of treason and treasonous acts against them. He argued that Marshall was an instrument of the Soviet conspiracy, and that that he was trying to see the downfall of the United States. He even goes as far as to say that if you were homosexual, you had to be a communist. Yeah, sounds about right, right? McCarthy's Senate hearings kind of take on this atmosphere of show, of conformity and fear, but it's also this gigantic affair. They were televised, and he continued to go and develop this. He then decides to go and look for spies in the U.S. Army and goes as far to actually start accusing high-ranking members of the U.S. Army of being Soviet spies. One of the dudes that he accuses is a man by the name of Joseph Welch. He's an attorney for the Army itself, and he basically, Welch actually cross-examines McCarthy during these hearings and shows that McCarthy's basically a big bag of hot air, that he has no actual true and real proof of what's going on, and it largely leads to the downfall of McCarthy. As a result of that, the Senate will actually have a committee to censure him and to begin investigating McCarthy himself. And by December of '54, the Senate actually begins to restrict his privileges and his ability to do anything. He's eventually removed from Senate, and within 3 years of being removed from Senate, he dies. From alcohol and exhaustion. But they say that he had committed acts that were unbecoming of an American. And that's part of the trial itself. Much as the Red Scare was causing the United States to be a culture of great conformity, because of the fear that existed, there's, to a certain extent, you kind of look at the 1950s as whether it's this time frame of kind of this conservative era and complacency and contentment, or if it's really a time frame of anxiety and alienation. And when you look at the adult culture, I would say it's definitely, you know, we're okay with the way things are in the status quo. When you look at the youth culture, it's like, no, we want something that's our own. And that's not that different from any time frame. Most of the time frames you can look and you talk to your parents and they'll be like, well, when I was a kid, right? But then it's like their parents also did that to them. And unfortunately, there are times that I find myself doing that also. There will be a day when you get to be older that you will say it too. So just wait. It will happen. Because when I was your age, I was like, that will never happen. No, it does. And it did. But largely, post-war America becomes this kind of frame of whether it is one or kind of the other. I would argue it's a mixture of both. Post-war America, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act has allowed for great growth in America, including the baby boom, the rise of suburbs, and also the rise of new ability to move outward and to have something more. In addition to that, the war has largely brought with it a great deal of technology, including new technology on how to deal with disease and fight disease. Not only have we been able to figure out things like chemotherapy as a way to battle cancer, we're able to figure out mechanical heart valves and pacemakers to deal with heart disease. In addition to that, we're able to deal with tuberculosis and come up with new antibiotics for treatment rather than simply isolating somebody who had TB and waiting for them to die or to figure their body to figure it out on their own. In addition to that, we're able to come up with a vaccine for polio. So kids in school initially had to take a shot, and there was actually a series of shots that were given all at one time. Some of your parents might be old enough to have the polio vaccine scar on one of their arms because literally they went to school and they got a series of shots that was almost like, I don't know how to describe it, other than it's like the not the barrel, but the loading chamber of a gun that's got, you know, lots of different rounds in it. And when they squeeze the trigger, they all go at the exact same time into the skin, all the shots at once. Okay? Now that's largely because of Salk in helping to figure out how we can create that injectable vaccine. But even later on then, as a result of Sabin, we figure out, hey, there's a better way to do this for kids. We can put the vaccine on a sugar cube and make them eat the sugar cube and they'll get the vaccine in the same manner than actually having to have like a whole bunch of stabs with needles all at one time. But it'll work. But as a result of that, and as a result of the vaccines that will come out during the 1950s, we see childhood diseases that had largely plagued American society be eradicated. Measles, mumps, polio, okay? And that these ones will begin to go away, which causes two things. One, post-World War II, we see a baby boom, right? You have to think about it this way. Great Depression, people aren't having babies. Okay? World War II, the men are off fighting the war. People still aren't having babies. End of the war, end of Great Depression, prosperity, and babies. Lots and lots of babies. But here's the other thing, that because of these childhood vaccinations, children are living longer. The life expectancy in the United States goes up dramatically because of vaccinations. Period. So whether you're an anti-vaxxer or not, kids live longer because of vaccines. They allow kids to survive. Okay? Otherwise, children that would have died from simple diseases. Unfortunately, because of the anti-vaccine movement in the United States, many of those childhood diseases that were eradicated in the United States are making a comeback. My children were all vaccinated. They're on the desk here. The next guy that we'll talk about that has revolutionized the way the United States looks at things, and is a very anti-conformist type of an ideal, is Alfred Kinsey. Kinsey basically comes up with what's called the Kinsey Report, and he takes and he studies the sexual behavior of men and women, as well as the sexual behavior of animals. Not only using interviews to report on that sexual behavior, but also observation to report on that sexual behavior as well. And he creates these files, which he promises the individuals that they'll never go public. In fact, the only way to read the notes that the researchers was taking was to actually have the key to read the research notes. It's very detailed. And in addition to that, all individuals in the study, they actually were... the individuals within this study were not given a name on the top of their report. They were given an ID number. And so you had to have this whole separate document to be able to connect the ID with the people. And those reports, the people that participated in those reports, still have not been released to this day. So he did a really good job in his research team of making sure that information would remain hidden and secret. And so as a result of that, people were willing to open up and be quite honest about their different things that they have experienced in their life. And when he comes out in the end of it, during his lifetime, there's 17,000 people that will be interviewed as part of his Kinsey reports. After he dies, there's an additional 1,000 people that are interviewed and that contribute to some of that research as well. But what he comes up with is he says that homosexuality exists on a continuum in the United States, and then on some, or in the world globally, and then on some level everyone is attracted to members of the same sex as well as the opposite sex. It's just a matter of how much you're attracted to that individual or to the same sex. Does that make sense? Or the opposite sex. And so he argues that homosexuality is not actually wrong, that it's a part of human nature and part of animal nature also. Where'd it go? Okay, there it goes. The other thing we talked about that is the baby boom, right? By 1957, which is the peak of the baby boom, there's literally one baby born in the United States every 7 seconds. It occurs in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Only in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Why in the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia? Why not in the other developed world? Why not in the other European states?
They didn't get out of the war as well.
Exactly. They didn't come out of the war unscathed, right? Their homelands didn't. They had to rebuild. So the baby boom there does not occur like it does in areas that were not had direct fighting in them. But between 46 and 1957 then is the peak years. We include some additional years after that, all the way up until 1966 is kind of when the defining point of when the baby boom there ends. But we can see that post Great Depression, post World War II, that birth rates increased dramatically in the United States as a direct result of that baby boom. Over the course of the baby boom, there are 77 million babies that are born. Most families will wind up with 4 or more children per family, and it becomes very, very common. Your parents may be a part of that baby boomer generation. Mine are a part of that baby boomer generation. And it makes sense when you think about it, right? You have this great time frame where there isn't a lot of children being born because of economic hardship and then because of the war. And post, right, men come home, families are able to grow. You have the GI Bill, you have people who had served being able to build a home or be able to go to college or start a business. So I have the economic opportunity to be able to grow within that as well. And so now, today, as a result of this baby boom, though, it's becoming an issue because we have a population, much larger, older population than our younger population who's still in the working age. So as these individuals retire out and begin to collect Social Security, there is more that is coming out of Social Security than is going into Social Security, which is why it becomes such a question of whether or not Social Security will last. Here's the deal, though. Who votes? Who's the largest percentage of people that vote?
Elderly.
The elderly people. So is Social Security probably going to go away?
No.
Probably not, because I doubt they're going to vote for a candidate that's going to make that happen. Does that make sense? I doubt Social Security would go away. It might be changed, but I doubt it will go away. Now, with so many people, there's also a major housing boom. There's a huge shortage of housing after World War II. And so a dude by the name of William Levitt decides, hey, there's got to be a better way to build houses. Because if you looked at it, houses took a really long time to build, right? And on top of that, you have to go to an inspector and get building permits and draft your architectural plans, and those have to get approved, and it's this long process, and it's costly and it's expensive. So he says, let's take the principles of scientific management and the principles of mass production, and let's apply it to housing. What he's able to do by applying that structure to housing is he's able to drastically increase the number of houses that could be produced within a single year, from about 5 houses per year prior to the war to about over 17,000 houses per year. Now he does that by making them cookie cutter houses. They all look exactly the same. He builds his first community on Long Island, and he names it after himself. It's Levittown. But Levittown is just as much a symbol of conformity as anything else in our society, okay? There was no fences. You had to have regular lawn care. Your trees and everything else had to be geometrically planted. So not only did they need to be in a straight line, but any shapes had to be geometric shapes. So for example, if we go ahead and we look at this, this is a Levitt home, okay? So the trees, geometrical in their shape, right? Okay. You couldn't have a doorbell. You couldn't hang up your laundry on a Sunday, because Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest, not a day of work. Okay? So therefore, you can't be doing laundry on Sunday, because Sunday is a day of rest. And besides, women, you have a week to do laundry. You know, you're a stay-at-home mom. Anyways, the vast majority of those people that moved into Levittown were married. There are later a few that are unmarried, but it is very rare. And Levittown was segregated. Okay? It was for whites only. But it matches that ideal of conformity. And here appears your modern suburb that we are all so used to seeing. Go to any area of housing development and you will see houses that are cookie cutter, okay? Produced. Most of them were just a single story high. The living room was probably about 12 feet by 19 feet, so they were by no means large. There were typically only 2 bedrooms because the American family ideal was mom, dad, and 2 kids, so 2 kids would share 1 room, but big enough in mom and dad's room that they would be able to have their 2 separate beds. The bathroom was typically tiled, and sometimes you had a garage, but usually a very small backyard. The majority of your lawn was in the front of your house because you should be out with your community members engaging in community affairs rather than hiding away in your backyard, which would mean secrecy and communism. Most people in suburbs were the same age. You giggle at me, but the reality of Levittown is it is a perfect example of conformity. Most were white-collar workers. Approximately 60% were in the middle class. They began spreading everywhere beyond that. They had the same background, similar income, similar family structure. They would share tools. They would carpool, etc. Everything was the same. The only thing that allowed you to have anything that was a little bit different than the next guy was your car, which is why cars in the 1950s begin to have quite dramatic flair, whether it was, I mean, it's hard to see in this Chrysler, but whether it would be from the wings on the side of it or the colors of cars during the 1950s. It was in that you were able to get your symbol of this is me and this is who I am. Okay? So, TV plays a huge part in this as well. Newton Minow, who is the chamber of the Federal Communications Commission, of 1961, says that television is the new American wasteland. But that TV pushed on the truth, justice, and the American way. Early TV did not have that many shows whatsoever at all. Most of it was in the afternoon or in the evening. Most of it also black and white. There was no remote control, so you had to go up to the TV and turn a knob to get the different channels. They were very large pieces in your room, in your living room. They were pieces of furniture. If you've ever been over to your grandparents' house, they might have one of these big giant boxes, or maybe at somebody's garage sale. But they were, you think the box TVs are big compared to the flat screen? When I say box TV, I'm talking about a good couple of desks here, box for your TV. Okay? I mean, they're actually kind of cool, but you had just a dial to turn it onto your few channels that you had. The family ideal and the American ideal was portrayed on that. We can see that in shows such as I Love Lucy. Lucy very much typifies the gender roles that women were supposed to have. Lucy was supposed to stay at home. In the few episodes where Lucy tries to go and get a job, such as Lucy in the Chocolate Factory, she goes out and gets a job, and what happens?
She dies.
No. She gets fired. She can't keep up. She fails at it miserably, and then she winds up eating chocolates and putting them under her hat, her and Ethel, right? And it's great comedy. One of the other episodes where she tries to go and get a job, and she tries to become an actress for a commercial. It's a Vitamita Vegemin episode, and she basically gets drunk in the process of it because of the alcohol content in the medicine that she was taking. And on the other hand, her husband, character's name is escaping me, but it was Desi, was her actual husband. When he's in the role of the housewife and he's cooking and cleaning, he too fails at it miserably, right? So again, reinforcing these gender roles that were supposed to exist. In 1959, the average family watched 6 hours per day. Okay? Yeah, right? And that's with most of them programs being in the afternoon and evening. So much so that it reshapes the family structure. In that now, instead of sitting down for a nice family meal, you now go to the microwave, which are these new fandangled things that exist, and you pop in a TV dinner, and then you take it and eat in front of the TV as a family. But again, we can see that mom, dad, and 2 kids shown in these typical suburban kind of family style. TV stations are charged for the advertising of products, and so we'll see it revolutionize advertising in the United States. In addition to that, it will revolutionize other industry. We will see for the first time in 1950 the creation and use of video cassette tapes. I know. Video cassette, what's that? Okay, but a video cassette tape where you could record live programming of television and then re-watch it again and again. It's like DVR, but it's not, what's that?
Until you melt the tape and actually.
Yeah, until you melt the tape or the tape itself gets pulled out or whatever else and ruined, right? But by 1960s, the sports, we start seeing them on TV, and ultimately it also winds up coming into our election system, and we'll see with the election between John F. Kennedy and Nixon, it played a huge role, just as much as radio had played a huge role in the 1920 election, right? And that playing a huge role within society previously. It also causes many theaters, movie theaters, to shut down for a while and turn into bowling alleys because people weren't going to watch movies anymore because they could watch that same kind of content on the TV. Westerns were huge in the United States. Shows like Davy Crockett, The Lone Ranger, the Sheriff. In addition to that, other ones included Gunsmoke, Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers. They're approximately 1/3 of all of the television shows. Of course, then we have our middle class family and the ones that did well and ones that didn't do well, including I Love Lucy, which very much conforms to what women were supposed to do. In The Honeymooners, the women worked outside of the home. They were also impoverished and poor. Do well, women work at home. don't do so well, women in the workforce. Reinforcing gender roles, right? There were other shows as well, including quiz shows. The $64,000 question was one of the most popular until it got found out that they were basically rigging the game and that nobody was actually winning any money. The people that were quote-unquote winning money were like actors that were hired to like fill in the roles. There were also cup dramas like Dragnet, okay? So TV becomes a huge importance in the United States American culture. And Hollywood has to change. Movie theaters change because of the lack of initial inactivity, and so they have to try some different things, including 3D movies for the first time, and also blockbusters such as The Roll, 10 Commandments, Around the World in 80 Days, other movies that reinforced ideas about communism and the scariness of communism, including The Blob and Invasion of the Body Snatchers and They, which were, again, all designed to get Americans to conform and not become communist, right? But that consumerism that is brought with the baby boom will allow for greater and greater things to be brought to the market. And again, advertising plays a key role, as well as playing on the fears of Americans and their communist fears also plays a huge role in that, as well as playing on the role that the women were fulfilled within the home. So we can see that within Tupperware advertisements and American women. You can now be a stay-at-home mom, but yet provide some income from your family by becoming a Tupperware saleswoman. Okay? Or, okay, if you want the Iron Curtain look, it is here. That's one of my favorites. I think it's hilarious. But even so much as TV also are ever advertised here, we have a GE television set, and you can see it is a huge piece of furniture that would belong in your family as well. The workplace also begins to change and becomes more and more automated. Between 47 and 57, the number of factory workers is decreasing dramatically in the United States, and so we're losing blue-collar jobs, and we begin to see more white-collar jobs in the United States by 1956. In addition to that, changes are coming because of technology. In 1941, the Mark I is developed for use during the course of the war for better communication purposes and spying purposes. But by 1951, IBM has invented the first mainframe computers. Not to say that these transistors and these computers that were developed by any means were your home PC or your laptop, because the Mark I took up a room all on its own. Okay? So it's not like the vast majority of Americans had these, but what you need to understand is that a computer is coming out, and it is going to dramatically reshape how we do everything, from the production of goods to the research of what to buy, sell, etc. Okay? Will you stop filming for me there, please, Cole?